Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films. Even though I am not solitary today, this is Sevens with Ronin, Part 2, and today I'm delighted to be joined by SJS from SJS Arts. How are you doing?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm doing fairly well. Again, this is going to be a music show. It's always good to talk about something different than films. And today it's something a little bit different. It's an introduction to death and potentially black metal. I'm not that familiar with death and black metal. Also, I've probably heard of bands, but I haven't actually listened to too many of them. So I'm hoping SJS will give us 7 recommendations, a kind of beginner's guide to death and black metal. And I'm just going to provide 7 of my slightly heavier bands that may be close to it, but not quite. Again, metal fans do love their categories, and I'm sure there's about 28 different categories for black and death metal. But perhaps, SJS, you could maybe start with what to you makes death metal and what makes black metal?
Okay, so both of them are of course like extreme metal, but there are quite a lot of differences. So of course with death metal we have these low growls, but with black metal we have these higher screams. So that's a big difference between the two genres, and also the production is very different often. That black metal sounds very thin, but death metal sounds kind of bigger, and they also often down-tune the guitars and stuff, so it sounds very different in that way. And also the atmosphere, I guess, is quite different, and although it always depends on like what death metal we talk about or what black metal we talk about, like you kind of mentioned in the beginning, again, metal fans are so particular with the genres into very like toxic levels that it can be really annoying to talk to other metal fans because they're just obsessed about the genres and don't just love the music.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, to me, there's kind of only 2 categories of music, good stuff and bad stuff. But we do sometimes get carried away with all the categories.
Yeah, I made a video a couple months ago where I talked about how I kind of cured my own genre elitism and stuff, and how I realized that there is only good music and bad music. That's the right way to go, just like we do with films. We don't really think that all horror films are bad or good, but some horror films are good, some are bad, and same with action and drama, etc.
Yeah, because I mean, I grew up obviously big into metal, and I remember thinking, I would never like music with keyboards in it. That was just a no-no. It was just guitars, bass, drums, and that was it. But obviously, strangely enough, I do like music with keyboards in it now, because you just kind of learn what you like, basically. So I guess both of them, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess both of them kind of came from hardcore and thrash, I suppose, but people wanted to take it a little bit further. And obviously bands like, so if you take Slayer's Hell Awaits and Rain and Blood and kind of mix them, and obviously Venom before that, and Bathory and people like that. And obviously in Scandinavia, that has just exploded. Is there any reason for that in Scandinavia, do you think, or is it just long nights?
Yeah, we often talk about the like long dark winters when there is no sunlight and it's very cold and depressing. That's the reason for it. But of course, I live in Finland, that has the most metal bands and metal fans per capita in the whole world. So here it's actually very common to be a metal fan. Although of course still most people are maybe into like Metallica and Iron Maiden and not into like brutal death metal and stuff, but there are plenty of death metal fans here. And if you look at Spotify, when they have for each band like what are the cities where kind of most people listen to this and that band, you can often see Helsinki in there as the most listened to or most fans, or whatever. How would you describe that? But anyway, yeah,
that's interesting. So do you just want to start with a choice? I certainly haven't ranked them. There's no need to rank them because this is just recommendations. But do you want to start with one of your 7?
Yeah. No, well, I decided that I'm gonna go with the death metal bands first, and then the black metal bands later on, and then in the end I'll have some quick honorable mentions as well. But I'm gonna start with one of the OG classic Florida death metal bands. Of course, Florida is kind of the place where death metal started. So I'm gonna go with Morbid Angel. Have you ever listened to them?
I haven't listened to them, but I've certainly heard of them and being obviously famous. I've seen lots of their album covers, but I've never actually listened to them.
Yeah, I haven't listened to all of their albums, but I've listened to the early stuff and then the mid-period stuff, but not the later stuff, because apparently that's like really awful. But again, their first album, Altars of Madness, came out in '89. It's one of those pioneering death metal albums that has influenced like countless different bands. And you often see that in like the greatest death metal albums of all time, lists sometimes even as number 1. And it's also one of my personal favorites. I actually went back to it before this podcast, and I really loved it still. And yeah, again, it has that kind of basic death metal formula, but it actually sounds really good, even though it's from the late 80s. So I think it really holds up well today. And it sounds a lot like bands like Slayer, but it just takes the heaviness to another level with the growls, and then the riffs and everything are a bit heavier and a bit faster, and obviously the blast beats and stuff, and the drums are a bit different than in thrash metal. But with Morbid Angel, their first 3 albums are the kind of classic stuff that every death metal fan listens to, and most people love them. And sometimes they also go a bit doomier, and one of the death metal subgenres obviously is a death doom metal, which is that like really slow death metal that sounds like extremely heavy. And I like it, even though I'm not that much into like normal doom metal, but death doom I like quite a lot. But I didn't have many of those death doom bands here on my list because they are maybe too heavy for beginners. But I think Morbid Angel would be a good place to start, as they innovated a lot within the genre, and they aren't like the most brutal band out there. And I think for people like you who have experience with bands like Slayer, I think this wouldn't be too much of a step forward after that. So I think you might like the early stuff if you listen to it.
Yeah, Altars of Madness is the one with the kind of black circle in the cover, kind of.
Yeah, or that kind of grey thing, yeah.
Because that is one of the things about death metal bands, their covers are quite fantastic in general.
Yeah, I remember before I ever heard their music, I just saw the logo and the album covers, and I knew that it was gonna be some heavy shit. But yeah.
Well, I'm going to go to Florida because I don't have that much, but I have got a few of Obituary.
Yeah.
Because obviously they were pretty much around the same time as Morbid Angel. And I think we're Cannibal Corpse a little bit later, probably. In the End Complete, and then a couple of their later ones. Well, that's just kind of an EP with the extras. Again, that's a kind of later one. Again, because for me, one of the things about Death in Black, because vocals are important to me. Yes, you can read lyric sheets, but I still think it's got to swing. It's got to boogie. And sometimes the vocals are just, I know you can look at it, well, the vocals is another instrument, and I get that. But again, for me, Obituary is still in the same it's still at an acceptable level. You can still make out what he's singing without going full kind of growls and grunts. But again, it's just like everything else. If you tune your ear to it, you get used to it. There's plenty of vocalists that initially I wasn't a fan of, but then over time you tune your ear to it. So that's Obituary, which probably does count as one of the early first wave of death metal, don't they?
Yeah, they are one of the classic bands. Obviously, their first two albums, I think Slowly We Rot is the first one, and the first two are like some of the biggest classics in the genre. And I was thinking of recommending those two, but I don't know their kind of whole catalog, so I only know that first two albums. So I thought that I'm not expert enough to go with them. And by the way, one more thing I'll say about Morbid Angel too, that with them you can often hear the lyrics, so the growls are the type of growls where you can hear many of the words. And David Vincent, who is the vocalist, he's usually considered to be one of the great death metal vocalists. But yeah, but Obituary is a great shout.
On to your second choice.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna go with another Florida fan, so it's Death, obviously. I mean, yeah, it's the most obvious choice, and they are one of my favorite bands. So I've listened to all of their albums. I think they made 7. I like all of them, and their first album, Scream Bloody Gore, that came out in '87, is one of the like pioneering albums. It came out even before the first Morbid Angel album, and I know Morbid Angel took lots of influence from that album. And of course, Death has kind of these different eras to them, even though they only made music for like a decade. They start with this kind of, you could say, cookie cutter death metal, but then they go towards this more technical stuff from like the third album onwards, and then the last couple of albums are almost like progressive metal, and they aren't that as heavy anymore, but they still have pretty harsh vocals. But I think with Chuck you can also make out the words, especially in the later stuff that I really love, like Symbolic and The Sound of Perseverance. I listen to those albums all the time, and Human from '91 is one of the pioneering albums of like technical death metal, which I'm a huge fan of as well, and that's one of the kind of main subgenres of death metal.
Yeah,
there are so many subgenres.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard a lot of death, but I just haven't bought an album. So what would be the album to go for first, do you think?
I think Symbolic for you, because there you can hear the words, and the riffs sound quite trashy, and there's lots of Slayer influence here too, and I think Metallica influence, and the albums are also like produced really well, so it sounds really good. So I think Symbolic, which is their second to last album, it's my favorite. It's their biggest classic, and I think you might like it, but who knows? Yeah,
that's hard to tell. And again, Death covers are really good as well.
Yeah,
the Leprosy cover is really good.
Yeah, I like the Sound of Perseverance cover, which is this kind of red, like mountain-like face, and yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah. Well, again, I'm going to go for, again, not death metal, but Sodom, who are one of the German thrash bands along with Creator, because their vocals are a little bit harsher, but they do still have that thrash kind of, obviously, classic riffage. Lots of songs about war, as you'd expect. But Sodom, again, I've only really got into Sodom recently, so to speak. But they are really good, because Sodom and Creator and Destruction, I think the other one, maybe Tankard, the German as well. But also the German thrash is different from American thrash. Granted, East Coast thrash is different from West Coast thrash, but the German thrash, again, is a little bit faster and a little bit heavier and a little more aggressive vocally. Again, part of that is perhaps English isn't their first language. But Sodom are really good as well. I do need to get some more Sodom, so to speak.
Yeah, I have heard some songs from them, but it's been such a long time, so I don't really remember that well what they sound like. But I know Creator too, and so I guess they sound quite similar to that. But yeah, I don't really remember that well. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you could put Creator obviously together as well. Pleasure to Kill and Coma of Souls are fantastic.
Yeah.
So what's up next?
Yeah, now I'm gonna go to Sweden. I think we have to talk about Swedish death metal in a beginner's list. So I'm going with my favorite out of the big three bands. So it's called Dismember. Okay, the big three bands are Entombed, Dismember, and Grave. And Entombed, I could have gone with them as well, but I'm gonna go with Dismember as they are my favorite. And I actually went through their whole catalog in this past week. I hadn't heard some of them. So they made eight albums and a couple of EPs, and they all kind of sound fairly similar. So if you listen to a couple albums, you kind of know how the whole catalog sounds like. But of course, some of them are still better and some of them are worse. But their first album, Like an Ever-Flowing Stream, which is one of the big classic death metal albums, came out in '91. So they were influenced by the Florida bands, of course. But then they themselves influenced lots of bands, especially in Sweden and here in Finland. Okay, they created their own type of guitar tone, which we often call like buzz saw type of guitar tone. It sounds like very particular. And they also kind of fall into that melodic death metal side. And I think for beginners, the melodic stuff might be a bit more easier as it doesn't sound quite as heavy. And here with the vocals, yeah, you can't really hear the lyrics that well, but they aren't like the most brutal type of growls either. And the drumming isn't as death metal as with other death metal bands, so it actually sounds like very similar to like the drumming in Slayer and bands like that. So not like full-on blast beats all the time or anything like that. And they are just known for their like great riff writing, and yeah, I guess the guitar sound is the biggest kind of innovation that they came up with. And in the 90s, Sweden had so many death metal bands, and then melodic death metal bands, they kind of pioneered that sound in there with bands like Dark Tranquillity and the early In Flames stuff, and that stuff is good too. But yeah, I would start with their first album, again, Like an Ever-Flowing Stream, as that's the biggest classic and probably the best album and also my personal favorite. But if you like that, then you should definitely go through the whole discography. The EPs are really cool as well, and all the albums are good, even though there are a couple that aren't as good as the biggest classics. But yeah.
Yeah, so it's a stupid question, but what is the difference between death metal and melodic death metal, apart from one is more melodic, theoretically?
No, well, the vocals are often actually quite different. So in melodic death metal bands, the vocals are somewhere in between like normal death metal and black metal. So they are like higher type of screams. Kind of like in black metal, the screams are kind of high screams. So I think that's the biggest difference between them, and also the drumming. You don't really hear like those kind of really brutal, fast blast beats in most melodic death metal. It's more kind of average metal drumming. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do actually have two Entombed, Left Hand Path, and I can't even remember the other one.
Clandestine. Is it that one?
Yeah, and I've also got the thing about Shooting Straight, which is more almost groove metal. It's not really. Yeah. It's one of their later ones.
Yeah, they call it death and roll often.
Yeah. So, but Entombed again are another kind of seminal band that everybody talks about.
Yeah, Dismember sounds very similar to them. So yeah.
I haven't heard any Dismember, certainly. So I'm going to go for something a little bit different, something fairly newer. Again, this is not Death or Black by any stretch of the imagination. This is Kill or Be Killed, which has Max Cavalera from Old Sepultura and Soulfly and various other things. It has the singer from Dillinger Escape Plan, and it has the bass player from Mastodon. So, and each of them sing. So you have the high stuff and the Screams of Dillinger Escape Plan. You have the kind of mid-range stuff from the guy from Mastodon, and then you have Max Cavalera with big breakdowns and his usual gruff shouting. They've only got 2 albums. Hopefully they do more because it's really good. And again, the 3. Sometimes if you have a band with several vocalists, it's kind of difficult, and you feel like each bit's kind of stuck together, so they each get a wee bit to sing. But these 2 albums actually work really well as far as using each of their voices to their strengths. And they certainly have their heavy moments, usually when Max Cavalera goes into his big breakdown riffs. But they are a lot of fun, and they're obviously really miserable and angry as far as the lyrics are concerned, which is always good.
Yeah, so I haven't heard that, but I obviously know all the bands that the members come from. So Dillinger Escape Plan is one of my favorite bands, and I actually have one Mastodon album here, Crack the Sky. So yeah, fan of them as well. And then Sepultura, I have listened to some of their albums like Arise and something else. I cannot remember the names, but I like Sepultura, and that's obviously one band that but that's a band that it's thrash metal, but it's kind of death metal too, so it's kind of between that. But
yeah, before they did Roots, which was just a little bit strange, and then they split up.
The first Sepultura song I listened to was Roots, Bloody Roots, and everyone was obsessed about that when I was a kid. So yeah.
That's a fantastic riff. Yeah. So what's your next choice?
Yeah, the next choice I can actually show a couple of albums, so that's nice. So it's Opeth, my favorite metal band of all time. So, but of course, Opeth has a couple of different eras. So these days they do that kind of 70s homage prog rock, which I also like, but I have the love for the death metal stuff more than the new stuff. But so I have one vinyl and one CD. I'll show the CD first. So this is my favorite metal album of all time. It's Ghost Reveries, which is absolute perfection to me. And I think Opeth would be a good band to go with for a beginner due to the fact that they have those acoustic passages and lots of dynamics in their songs, so it's not like brutal front to back, so you can take breathers with the growls and stuff. And Mikael has a really beautiful voice when he sings, so I think it would be like a good way to start with. And then I have their like maybe biggest classic album, Blackwater Park. So this is the 20th anniversary version from a couple of years ago, and this is when
that's nice.
They started working with Steven Wilson and stuff. And it's a very big like landmark album for death metal, as they brought in lots of like bigger production to it and added lots of different layers. So it's a very influential and big classic album, and I absolutely adore that. And I think their albums from Still Life to Watershed, that's one of the best album runs of all time. I just absolutely adore all of those records. And for people who aren't into death metal, I would highly recommend the album Damnation, which is just basically like folky progressive rock, so no growl vocals, no metal at all. But they did that album back when they were still a death metal band, so I think that album would be accessible to anybody who's listening to this.
That was in between two of them, wasn't it?
Yeah, they released it like along with their album Deliverance, which is one of their like heaviest albums, and it was the album that came out before Ghost Reveries that I showed here. But again, another Swedish band, a very popular band, and I saw them live in 2019 in London, and such a great show. And I actually, like almost next to me, there was this like very popular YouTuber that like this kind of guitar YouTuber called Rapea Masad, who has like hundreds of thousands of subscribers, but as I'm just such a coward, I didn't say hi, even though I was a fan, but it was cool. Yeah. But yeah, very, very cool show. But Mikael has kind of now lost his growling vocals, so I don't think they will ever go back to that stuff. But it's really cool to still listen to those old albums, because they are just some of my absolute favorite albums of all time.
So did they play a bit of both in 2019?
Yeah, they still play the old songs, but his growls just don't sound that good anymore.
Yeah.
They used to be like the best in the world, but now they are just okay.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm familiar with Opeth and familiar with all those albums, but I just haven't bought any because you'll probably shout at me, but the only Opeth album I have is the one with the peacock, which is the one with the start of the 70s kind of clean vocals. I do love that album. But obviously quite a lot of Opeth fans would shout at me, but yeah, I mean, I do like him as a person. He always gives good interviews. He does have a great sense of humour as well. So I probably will investigate Opeth, because obviously they're probably the most famous out of the bands that we've talked about, probably.
And again, the Damnation album, as it is kind of that singer-songwriter, folky, progressive rock type of thing, I think you at least like that one, but not sure about the death metal stuff. But I wouldn't touch the first couple of albums, they are pretty rough, but the mid-period death metal, the 2000s stuff. Yeah.
So that's why it's always interesting to get, very much like films, to try and get a band's whole discography, because there's obviously some bands that just start with an amazing debut, but then there's other bands you can see just kind of building and learning the ropes and then getting better, and then becoming what they would become. So career arcs, I guess, in everything is pretty interesting. So I will, seeing I mentioned Max Cavalera, I'm going to mention him again. Nail Bomb, which he only did one album and a live album, which is called Proud to Commit Commercial Suicide, which is a fantastic title. And this was a project he did with Alex Newport from Fudge Tunnel. I'm not particularly aware of Fudge Tunnel. I don't know whether you are. I think they're a hardcore band, perhaps. But this is just absolutely fantastic. And this is the one that combines both. But the original cover, I think, is a Vietnamese person with a gun to their head from the Vietnam War. It's just so many fantastic riffs. 24-hour bullshit, gorillas, blind and lost, some of your achievements, cockroaches, for funk's sake, but obviously it's not funk. World of shit, religious cancer, shit pinata, sick life. It's just an absolute banger, an absolute assault. Again, as I said, they only did one, but it's absolutely fantastic. It's from about 1990, something like that, after he left Sepultura and before Soulfly. But it's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I haven't heard that one, but yeah, I need to listen to it, I guess.
Yeah, it's fantastic. You can pick up the original one pretty cheaply.
Now, you mentioned Soulfly. I remember listening to them as a kid, but not since. So.
Yeah, I don't think I've heard any Soulfly, to be honest.
Yeah.
But Nail Bomb is just wonderful. So what's up next?
Well, I'm now gonna change to black metal. So I have 3 black metal bands. And then in the honorable mentions in the end, I have kind of both death metal and black metal. But so this first band is another Swedish band called Dissection. And I have to give a small warning with this band, because you're gonna have to kind of separate the art and artist with this band, because the singer murdered someone in the 90s and went to jail, and then they kind of reunited after that. They did one more album, but then he killed himself. So you don't kind of have to worry that the money would go to a murderer if you kind of put money into them now. But yeah, but I know some people cannot separate the art and the artist. But yeah, I just wanted to give that disclaimer before I go into them. But yeah, they started in the late 80s, but their first albums came out in 93 called The Somber Lane. But they only did 3 albums, so easy band to get into. I think only the 3 albums are in total 2 hours and 15 minutes or something, so easy listening that way.
Yeah.
But my favorite album by them is their second album, The Storm of the Light's Bane, from 95, and that's one of my favorite black metal bands. But the reason why I'm recommending this to beginners is that it's a melodic black metal band, so it doesn't sound as harsh or brutal as some of the really lo-fi early normal black metal. That's like the most difficult music to get into out of all music. And they also had like decent production, which wasn't common for black metal during the 90s. So the production won't turn people off. And we have this kind of debate with Dissection whether they are melodic black metal or melodic death metal. So there's a bit of both here. Again, it's a stupid debate, but
because we must know.
Yeah. I just can't get metal fans sometimes, but I've kind of learned to be obsessed about the genres to a degree myself, so that I can discuss these things with other metal fans without them getting angry. But but very easy kind of entry level black metal band. I think you see this in many like beginner's guide to black metal list, so I think they must be good for that. And I actually hadn't listened to the final album that they did again after the singer got out of jail, like before yesterday, because had heard that it's not a good album, but I actually liked it quite a bit, but it wasn't as good as the first two really classic albums that kind of shaped the genre. Yeah, really cool band and easy to get.
Yeah, because a lot of black metal productions sometimes sounds like they're recorded in airplane hangars and stuff like that, or in a cave somewhere.
Yeah, black metal was really hard for me to get into as well. Actually, fully got into black metal just last year. But death metal, I've been into death metal my whole life, basically. But black metal was really hard for me.
Yeah, because I'm a bit older, I suppose I'm more thrash than death, obviously. But we'll see. Well, we mentioned Death Doom earlier, so I'm just going to mention Doom. This is Church of Misery, who are Japanese. They're a trio, and I think throughout their history, the only constant's been the bass player. And he wears his bass. It's the lowest slung bass you'll ever see in your life. It's literally on his shoes. I know Doug Pinnick from King's X, which is one of my favourite bands of all time. He wears it pretty low around his knees. But I mean, the bass player in Church of Misery, it's literally on his feet that he plays it. So they are kind of doom, not just doom. I know doom isn't actually a genre, but I've just invented it. And all their albums, all their songs are about serial killers as well. So their songs are really, well, dark, strangely, but they're really thick and dense, in more ways than one, perhaps. But just the noise they can make just with the three of them. So it's not, I mean, some doom is quite clean production, but this is all, there's a lot more fuzz. But they are rather fantastic. I mean, they have had different singers, because as I say, the bass player is the only one that's actually been a constant. So the quality of the vocals sometimes differs, but the albums are just fantastic. They don't have a lot of songs on them, which is kind of good, because there's nothing worse than a band that releases like 14 songs in an album and then about 5 of them are just disposable. And they have really fun titles as well. Obviously, that's a Black Sabbath rip-off, Master Brutality. And their latest one, I think their new one, is Born Under a Mad Sign, which is quite wonderful as well. And their song titles have the serial killer in brackets at the end of them. They've got a wonderful John Wayne Gacy one. So yes, it's obviously not death or dark, but it's black, sorry, but it's certainly dark. And again, the sheer weight of the sound that they make is quite impressive.
Yeah, I haven't heard of them, but I like lots of Japanese music, so I should give them a go. And I know some Japanese metal bands like Deer and Grey, and there's one death metal band called like Intestine Balism or something like that. Intestine, I don't know how to pronounce that, but yeah, that's pretty cool band as well. And I guess would be a decent entry-level band as well if somebody wants to check out all of these bands. But
yeah, and the thing with Japanese and Korean bands to some extent as well, the musicianship is really good because they have excellent players, because generally they play, when they're a kid. So a lot of them are just fantastic players as well.
Yeah, and they have the work ethic, okay, more than the Westerners, and even like Japanese punk bands, even they can play their instruments, even though punk bands usually cannot play more than 2 power chords.
Yes. So what's up next?
Yeah, well, it's actually the band that is on my shirt, Emperor, which is probably my second favorite black metal band. It's one of the second wave Norwegian classic bands, and they only made 4 albums, so easy to get into in that way. But their first 2 albums are the big classics, so In the Night Side, Eclipse, and then Anthems to the Welkin at Dusk, which is my shirt and which is my favorite. But the first album is quite lo-fi, so in that way it's quite hard to get into, and it was actually really hard for me to get into. I had to listen to it multiple times before I could even finish the whole album, but now it's like one of my favorites, and with such a killer kind of cover art as well. That kind of dark, frosty black metal classic, like Throne cover. But then, album by album, the production gets a bit better, and they also kind of go slowly into more technical and progressive side of metal. And so, depending on what you like, you will maybe like the early stuff more or the later stuff, but I think most people love the early stuff more because that's the more raw black metal that most black metal fans like. And they are also very symphonic band, and again they have kind of more sophisticated songwriting than many other black metal bands, and they don't have that much repetition, and the guitar playing is really tight, and the drumming is really tight, and they aren't like proud of being like sounding like really awful. Again, they're like a professional band. And then the Ishan, who has the vocals and the guitars and songwriting in this band, he also has had a successful solo career since like 2006, and that's some really avant-garde stuff with that mixes like black metal and saxophone together, and I really like that stuff. Yeah. And I actually got into that stuff before I got into Emperor, because that stuff is like really well produced, so I could more easily get into that, because my main problem with black metal was just the awful production, but it's just something that you need to get used to, and then you kind of fell in love with it in the end.
Yeah, they only made 4 albums. That's what Emperor have been around for a while, but just sporadic.
Yeah, they stopped making albums, but they still do gigs and festivals, and
yeah. So he's more a solo artist now, because he's released
he's
a bunch of albums
like
as well. So.
Yeah, more solo albums than Emperor albums.
Yeah, obviously I've heard of them because they're pretty big. But I just don't have anything. So I'm going to go back to Japan for Maximum the Hormone. Which, this is a whole book that just for like 1 CD. They are completely barking, as you might expect with that cover. So you can go on YouTube and go down a rabbit hole, because they do have lots of videos of their songs. So they are a mix of pretty aggressive, I would, not being an expert, I would suggest that it does get into death metal. They have somebody who growls, but they also have a female drummer who will break into really melodic poppy stuff. They do have kind of breakneck changes between really heavy fast stuff and then really poppy happy stuff. And again, you'll see if you go to YouTube and watch their videos, their videos are hilarious. But again, it's just that kind of frontal assault, but then they'll just stop and do something completely different. They have their greatest hits album, 2011 to 2011, which is basically just 3 songs they released in 2011, but they called it a greatest hits album. Lots of energy, completely barking, but really good if you like music that's unpredictable and you don't kind of know what's coming next. I would recommend Maximum the Hormone if you can actually get any physical media of it. but I'm sure you can get downloads of it. But you can go to YouTube and enjoy yourself with their videos.
Yeah, I haven't listened to their music, but I think you may have mentioned them in like some old like music-related video or something.
Quite possibly. Yeah. A lot of fun.
So I think it's the 5 final choices now. So
yeah.
Well, this one I also have on vinyl or one of their albums. So this is actually a Finnish band, and they kind of have a Finnish name. So hopefully you can kind of make it out. But it's Oranssi Pazuzu. So Pazuzu obviously is a famous like demon name, but Oranssi means orange. So Orange Pazuzu. So they are this kind of avant-garde black metal. So they might be maybe very difficult to get into, but they might be very easy to get into due to the fact that they mix kind of black metal with psychedelic rock and space rock and krautrock and even electronic stuff. So those other influences might make it a bit easier to relate to. So that's why I can chose them. But this is their latest album, which has this really cool kind of abstract cover art.
Nice.
Yeah. And this is their best album, so they've kind of improved throughout their career, but they started in 2007 and this one came out in 2020, and I think they are making a new album now. But like I said, there are so many different influences there. They made 5 different albums. The earlier stuff is more pure black metal, even though there is some like weird stuff there in too, but this later stuff is like the black metal kind of takes a back seat, but it sounds almost like psychedelic rock with black metal vocals. Right. So the vocals might be really hard to get into because they sound like really screechy and that high, like really disgusting sounding screams. But there are these kind of lots of kind of instrumental passages, so the vocals aren't accompanying all the instrumentals all the time. So there are lots of dynamics there that might make it easier, and there's lots of kind of repetition there, and again lots of electronic beats, and they've been even influenced by like trip hop, like you see Massive Attack's Mezzanine there. So I think they were influenced by that album, and they've also been, I think, influenced by bands like Coil, for example, and things like that, industrial stuff and electronic stuff, all the kind of very weird stuff. So I think if you can get past the really weird vocals, this might be a band that many people could appreciate due to like the incredible production and attention to detail and the variance in the songwriting and everything. The last album sounds kind of like, again, it sounds like you are in hell or something like that, even though it's not that like full-on black metal. It's like a very visual listen, and I love those types of albums that really create kind of images in your head. And like I showed this cover, it feels like this weird cover. Again, there's this hand there and some random eyes, and it's very abstract, but yeah, great record, and it's been like a very acclaimed record when it came out too. So yeah,
no, you don't want to make it too accessible or too easy for people to get into. So, I could do a whole show on Coil. I absolutely love Coil.
I've listened to a couple of the albums and really loved them, so I need to listen to more.
Yeah, I mean, they've got so much stuff, even though unfortunately both of them are dead now. And of course, Stephen Thrower, the film critic, used to be in them for a short period in the 80s. So I'm going to go with, I think they are actually a death metal band, but for me, this is an example of, the categories, because to me, they're just a kind of heavier, faster thrash, but then maybe that's what death metal is. It's Vader from Poland, who I like a lot because I have a bunch of their albums. They've actually been around, I think, since the late 90s. And yes, you could say they're a one-trick pony, but it's quite a good trick. Again, if they're death metal, they're death metal, but again, for me, they're just kind of heavier, faster thrash. But again, that might be the definition of death. I'm not quite sure. But still fantastic riffs. Yes, it's kind of growly vocals, but you can kind of still make them out. Again, it's just 4 of them, but their stuff is really, really good. Excellent for public transport travel. And I've got another loads. I mean, they have been around for like 30 years, but I hadn't heard of them, not surprisingly, until about 18 months ago, 2 years ago, and it just kind of blew me away because, again, the vocals are harsh, but they're not too harsh. They're just on that side for me, and they do have some fantastic riffs. So I would highly recommend Vader from Poland.
Yeah, I've listened to a couple of their albums, and I actually listened to one of them last week for the first time, but now I cannot remember the name. But I think it was maybe from the year 2000, maybe.
Yeah, they're not quite as bad as Motorhead, releasing like an album every like year, it seems, but they're not anymore. But they're fairly prolific.
Yeah, but often they are considered to be death metal, but obviously there's so much thrash in there, and like you said, the vocals to me sound a bit more thrash than death metal, but if you listen to the Crazy Drummer, for example, it's all like death metal. So I mean, there are lots of crazy blast beats and stuff, and I really like the drumming in those couple of Vader records that I've heard, and the riffs are just killer, and the production was a bit weird in the one that I listened to. The drums sounded
some
really
of them
weird,
are
but
better than others as far as the production are concerned.
But they're definitely a big classic band, and I'm sure that if you watched like many of these lists on YouTube, they would probably make an appearance many times there.
So do you have honorable mentions? I'm sure you do.
Yeah, I have some. Yeah, but some of these bands again aren't like full-on death metal or black metal, but I think those bands, like I said, sometimes might be the best entry points. So I'm gonna go with another Finnish band. They're called Winter Sun. So they are more of that melodic death metal stuff, but they also have kind of power metal feel to them and lots of folky stuff. So I think they're a very kind of good entry-level band, especially if you look at YouTube, there are so many reaction videos to their songs, and you can see that so many people from different backgrounds can get into them because they sound very kind of cinematic and epic. They sound like, again, Lord of the Rings, but music. So I think, again, you don't really have to have a huge background in metal to get into them, and they only made 3 albums because the songwriter is known as this huge perfectionist that is never happy with his own album, so he never releases new stuff. So it's kind of like with Tool before Fear Inoculum, the huge kind of pause with the album. So it's kind of similar to that. He always just complains but again, the songwriter always complains that the new iMacs don't have enough RAM to produce this crazy stuff and things like that. So it's kind of become like a huge meme, and the fan base has kind of turned on them due to that fact. But the albums are really killer stuff, and I think again many people could get into them. And he also sings a lot. He has a tenor voice, even though he lost like 25% of his lungs when he was younger due to tuberculosis. But he still sings like a tenor and screams, so that's very impressive. But the vocals are pretty accessible for this type of stuff. But Winter Sun, again, kind of a crowd pleaser band. Do you have any honorable mentions? Or
I was just going to mention Nails. For some reason I can't find the CD, but Nails are a fairly modern band that when I saw the video for You'll Never Be One of Us, which is their latest album, I believe, it was just like, no, this isn't for me. And then about 2 or 3 months later, I watched it again, and it kind of okay. And then I watched it about 10 times because it's only like 2 minutes long, because all their songs are pretty short. And then I really got hooked on it, and then I ended up buying their stuff, and I really do like it. Again, I think they've only got 3 albums because they decided we only like the best bits in songs, so the breakdowns or the fast bits, so we'll just make our songs that. There'll be no intros and outros and stuff like that. So I think their first album's like 11 minutes. Their second album's 18 minutes long, and I think their last one was like a massive 24 minutes or something like that. And that's because it had an 8-minute track. So I wouldn't necessarily say they're great, but in a certain mood, again, perfect for public transport. It is just an absolutely fantastic assault. You know, that You'll Never Be One of Us album has a wonderful song, Life is a Death Sentence, which is a lovely sentiment.
Yeah, I love that stuff. Again, it's grindcore, and in grindcore, the kind of the how do you say? Well, all grindcore bands basically do those minute-long songs, and
Yeah.
often the albums are like 20 minutes long, but they have like 30 songs or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's really fun. But I absolutely love that type of metal, and I'm kind of surprised that if you can get into band like that you couldn't get into death metal, because I think that type of grindcore is like more heavier than many death metal bands.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't extensively tried to get into death, I'll be honest. But again, as I said, the first time I listened to Nails, it was just like, nah, that's not for me. But then for some reason, when I went back to it, it just kind of clicked. So I don't know what it was, but it works bizarrely. I mean, I don't know what they're doing because it has been a while since the last one. So maybe they've run out of song ideas.
Yeah, but if you ever feel like listening to more bands like that, I would recommend Big Destroyer, for example. They did a couple great albums like Terrifier and Prowler in the Yard. Again, that's like classic grindcore. And then there's this Finnish band, Rotten Sound, that I just got into. They actually have the drummer from Winterson that I just talked about, but it's that kind of full-on blasting grindcore stuff too. That's just insanely heavy and fast. But as it is, as the albums are so short, it's easier to get into in that way. And of course, grindcore is kind of adjacent to death metal. There are influence there from like hardcore punk and death metal, and it kind of combines those two things together.
Yeah, and of course Napalm Death, which I don't have any of, but obviously they've got the wonderful 1 second song.
Yeah.
Which if you see it performed live is hilarious. It's a wonderful sight to see live. And it's like, on to the next one. It's fantastic. But they've been around forever. So.
Yeah, since like the mid-80s.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were like pretty much the pioneering band for that stuff.
Yeah. Do you have any more?
Yeah, I have like 5 or 6 more.
Go for it.
Well, the next one I'm not going to talk as much about, but it's Autopsy. So one of the big classic American bands. Yeah, so they are more of that death, doom stuff, and their first 2 albums, Severed, Survival, and Mental Funeral, are some of the like huge classics of the genre, and they are still making music. They actually released a new album last week, which I haven't heard yet, but apparently it's very good. So still like 35 years later, they are still making good stuff, so that's very impressive.
Yeah.
Well, then, if I go through this fairly quickly, so you actually mentioned this band earlier, but it's Battery. So, of course, if you want to get into black metal, this is the pioneering band, and the kind of more trashier type of band, because Battery, again, the guy who made that music was a big, I think, Metallica fan, so he was big into like the first couple of Metallica albums, but he wanted to take it into a heavier direction. It's very lo-fi stuff, but very epic stuff, and he also kind of created this subgenre of metal called like Viking metal. So he's kind of the pioneer of that too. Yeah, but some really cool albums like Bloodfire Death and Hammerheart, and then the one that was where the guy is in the door of hell or something. I can't remember what that album is called, but that's like a huge classic. Yeah, but Battery, again, classic Swedish band. Then there's this English classic death metal band called Bolt Thrower. Again, one of these kind of cookie cutter bands, but in a good way. They did this kind of basic death metal, very consistent sound throughout. Again, they started in the late 80s and did albums until the mid 2000s, but then their final album, they thought that it was kind of the perfect death metal album, so they didn't make any more albums after that. I think it's called like Those Once Loyal or something like that, but it's a great record. And then there's this kind of trashier death metal band from America, more modern stuff. So it's a band called Revocation, one of my favorite kind of modern bands. So their early stuff is basically all trash, but then as they have again matured, they've kind of gone through more of that death metal and technical death metal, technical thrash metal type of sound, and their songwriter, guitarist, singer has like a university level of jazz education, so, jazz guitar. So he uses lots of jazz chords and stuff, which makes it sound like very unique when they mix that jazz stuff with the death and thrash metal stuff. And again, it's that kind of virtuoso level of playing. So it might not be for everybody because it's very complex, but I think it's very fun listen. And again, I think for you, for example, this band might be a good place to go as they have so much that thrash element there. But yeah. Then I have two more bands. They're both Finnish bands, and for one of these, I want to read some of the song titles because they are so much fun. But the band is called Demilich, so it's this kind of classic underground death metal band from Finland. They only made one album, which is absolutely crazy. The vocalist sounds like a frog. He does that kind of very weird type of growl, and this is kind of technical death metal. It sounds like they are playing the riffs backwards. So this is kind of hard band to get into, but as they sound so weird and kind of cheesy even in a way, they might be in that way easier to get into. But there are a couple of these song titles that are some of my favorite song titles of all time. I actually read these out on one of my bracket battles as well. But so the second song of the album is called The 16th Six-Tooth Son of 14, Four Regional Dimensions, Still Unnamed. So such a long title, and yeah, it takes that kind of death metal cheesiness to like a whole other level. And then there's this, the putrefying road in the 19th extremity, then in brackets, somewhere inside the bowels of endlessness. Like such a cheesy name.
Yeah.
And then two more. The planet that once used to absorb flesh in order to achieve divinity and immortality suffocated to the flesh that it desired.
That's quite poetic.
Almost like a poem because they are so long. Yeah. And again, as these are written by a Finnish person in the early 90s, again, the grammar isn't all right, but yeah. Then the last song title, it sounds like a Cannibal Corpse song, but it's Raped, Empalmed, Beauty Sleep. So kind of classic death metal type of song.
Yes.
But again, only one album that's like 40 minutes long of like absolutely crazy avant-garde stuff that I think everybody should listen to once. You might not like it, but it's really cool. Yeah. But then the last band is called Moon Sorrow, another Finnish band, and they are kind of like a mix of they're kind of mix of like folk metal and black metal. So there are like really black metal elements there. The vocals are really black metal, but then there's these folky and nature recordings there as well, and they sound very cinematic when they do these 30-minute long songs, and they build very slowly, and they have kind of similar type of motifs and dynamics as classical music, but it's just black metal, but structurally it sounds like classical music, and they just take you into a journey, and they sound like some like brutal fantasy film and stuff like that. So again, due to the epicness, I think many people could get into them, but the vocals are very harsh, but they also have some like epic like choirs there too, to kind of mix it up a little bit. But one of my favorite bands. So,
because there is, I suppose, an element of even power metal and kind of almost orchestral metal at times and black metal. Well, hopefully everybody has written down all these titles and is going to go straight to Bandcamp or eBay or Apple Music if you're one of these strange people that listen to digital stuff. And hopefully that's actually given people an idea of how to dip their toe in the very black and murky waters of death and black metal. So what would you say black metal and death metal does to you in a physiological level while you're listening to it?
No, that's hard to say. I guess I just have so much nostalgia for these genres, so I kind of learned to listen to them when I was like 7 or 8 years old. So, and that's like really beneficial. I think these are like very hard things to get into when you are like older. You kind of have to be a metal fan, I think, from when you are a kid to like really get into the genre. Because we often say that when you are in your late teens, your kind of music tastes kind of calm down and they don't change that much anymore. Actually, for me, my taste has changed a lot even in my 20s, but I think for most people, you kind of settle down with your taste very early on. But yeah, I just get kind of lots of kind of, I could say, therapy from metal music in a way that it's kind of good way to channel those darker emotions and aggression, and they actually often calm me down, and I can kind of listen to metal music in any type of mood. Okay, they make me feel better when I'm sad, and also if I need to kind of get more energy, I can put something like Nails on or Morbid Angel and hear those blast beats screaming in my head, and then I feel all that energy. Yeah, so I think those are the reasons, and obviously like we talked about it early in the podcast, as I'm from Finland, there's like a bigger chance for me to become a metal fan. I actually remember this funny story when I was still living in London. It was in the early pandemic when we had to kind of queue up to Tesco and stuff. So in that line, I had my headphones on, and there was this random guy asking like, what was I listening to? And I said, metal. And he said that you don't look like a guy who listens to metal. And then he asks like, is the metal like British or American? Like there isn't any other type of metal, so it just has to be either Metallica or Iron Maiden. But I said that I listen to both, and also that normal people always say heavy metal, even though heavy metal is like a very particular type of metal. So it's that Iron Maiden, Judas Priest stuff, but Morbid Angel really isn't heavy metal. But it's really weird for me to always sometimes like talk to like normal people about metal music.
It's like normal people. Yeah. Normal people always let you down. Yeah, because certainly me growing up, everybody was so certain. Oh yeah, it's just a phase, and you'll grow out of it. And it's like, no. I mean, obviously, some bands that you don't really listen to as much, and your kind of taste changes. But this idea that you're just not going to listen to it anymore is just ridiculous. Because I think, it is outsider music, and if you view yourself as an outsider, then that's the home for you, and that's kind of certainly what I identify with metal, because a lot of the time the message of metal is kind of think for yourself and kind of work things out for yourself, and here's you don't have to look at the world in a certain way or the way you've been told to look at it, and think for yourself. And again, people who don't get it do think, oh yeah, that's just a noise, but it's like, have you tried playing it? Because it's, most of these bands, they can play instruments, and they can play instruments to a very high level, especially obviously when you get to the stage of like technical death metal and the stuff that Meshuggah plays and stuff.
I love Meshuggah.
You can't be, half-arsed at that kind of thing. And obviously the singing, yes, we talk about guttural and growls, but that stuff's not easy to do without just ruining your throat.
And many of them also sing, and they play guitar at the same time when they do live, so it's incredibly impressive. And bands like Opeth, obviously Mikael plays guitar and sings and screams and writes all the songs, and just incredible talent, and they sound like extremely tight live and everything. So many of these bands have like total virtuosos that could be in jazz bands as well and everything.
Because I mean, the number of people that say, I wouldn't be alive without metal music, you don't really hear people saying, oh yeah, I wouldn't be alive without pop music, or chart music, shall we say. Metal's just better, let's be honest.
Yeah, even but as you can see from my background, but you can see from my background that I also listen to like other stuff too these days, but I used to be a metal elitist.
It's just different. I mean, again, you like what you like, and same with films. I mean, there's films that you like, so people suggest a film that's very similar, and you just don't like it. It's the same with music. You can listen to a band and then listen to another band that's really similar, but it just doesn't click. So And the great thing about music as well as cinema, there's no real explanation for it. You can't work out why, because either you respond to it or you don't.
Yeah, but I kind of had I was kind of lucky when I was a kid because my father was pretty kind of open-minded with this stuff, and he got me into like Iron Maiden and stuff like that. And then I also had a friend whose father was a guitar player, and he was into death metal and stuff. And then as I played the guitar as well, more so when I was a kid, I took guitar lessons, and I had all these kind of metal guys as my teachers, and they played things like Opeth and Dream Theater and Death and all types of bands. So I was kind of lucky with my journey. But then as a teenager, I kind of had a period for a few years when I wanted to be like everybody else. So I went to Jennifer Lopez and Rihanna concerts and stuff. But then when I hit my 20s, I went back to metal and kind of became myself again. So that was good.
Yeah, you had a Rihanna show. That would have been interesting.
Yeah. And the Miley Cyrus too. So that's the worst one, I guess.
Well, thanks very much for coming on. That was a lot of fun. Hopefully we've given people some ideas, at least to go and have a look. Especially go and have a look at some Maximum the Hormone videos, because they are hilarious, as most Japanese music videos are, to be honest. So thanks very much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and shout out to the Departed as well.
One last prop. Yeah, that's completely thrown me off now. Even thinking about that film. So thanks very much. Hopefully we'll do this again with another subject. Put our thinking hats on. There you go.
Yeah, so many topics that we could do. It doesn't have to be metal. It could be like some decade thing or singer-songwriter thing or whatever. I listen to like all types of music these days. So
yeah, as I do as well. As long as it's 7, it has to be 7 of them, because we're not doing 5s and 10s here. It's only 7. So from SJS Arts, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, sometimes dabbling in music, saying thanks very much for watching. Please leave your comments below if you suggest any black or death metal albums for beginners, and hopefully we'll see you again very soon. Farewell.